The heavy oak doors of the Manhattan family court felt like the gates to a tomb. I stood in the hallway, adjusting the strap of the diaper bag on my shoulder. It was a high-end bag, a gift from my mother, but today it felt like lead. Inside the carrier against my chest, Leo was sleeping. He was 6 weeks old, a tiny bundle of warmth. And soft breaths, completely unaware that his father was currently sitting 10 feet away, laughing with the woman who had replaced me. I took a deep breath. The air in the courthouse always smelled the same old. Paper, floor wax, and the cold metallic scent of lost hope. I smoothed down the front of my gray wool coat. It was a simple coat, professional and understated. I didn't want to look like I was struggling, but I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard either. I wanted to look invisible, because for the last 9 months, that's exactly what Julian Sterling had made me feel. I pushed the door open. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but it felt twice as cold. Julian was already there. He was sitting at the petitioner's table, leaning back in his chair with that effortless, billionaire arrogance that used to make me feel safe. Now, it just made my skin crawl. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first apartment. Beside him sat Chloe. She was 23, a former intern at his venture capital firm, and currently draped in a cream silk blouse that highlighted the diamond necklace Julian had bought her 3 months before he filed for divorce. They were whispering. Chloe said something, and Julian let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind of laugh he used to save for our private dinners in the Hamptons. He didn't even look up when I walked in. He was too busy tucked into her space. His world narrowed down to his new life. Miss Vance, Julian's lead attorney, a shark named Marcus Thorne, said as I took my seat at the opposite table. He looked at the carrier on my chest, his eyebrows twitching for a fraction of a second before his face returned to a mask of professional indifference. I see you brought a guest. Julian finally turned his head. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did anymore. He looked at me, then his gaze dropped to the baby carrier. His face didn't soften. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask his name. He just looked annoyed, like I had brought a loud phone into a library. Really, Elena? Julian said, his voice smooth and cold. The sympathy play. It's a little desperate, don't you think? We're here to sign the final decree. The settlement I offered is more than generous for a marriage that lasted less than 3 years. Just sign the papers so Chloe and I can get to the airport. We have a flight to Stevie Bart's at 4. Chloe giggled, a high, tinkling sound that echoed off the high ceilings. She looked at me with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. It's a cute baby, Elena, truly. But Julian told me you were going to try something like this. Bringing a child into a courtroom. It's just so messy. Can't we just be adults? I didn't say a word. I sat down and placed my hands on the table. They were shaking, so I gripped the edge of the wood until my knuckles turned white. My lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, arrived a moment later. She placed a heavy leather briefcase on the table and gave me a small, tight nod. She was the only person in this room who knew what was about to happen. Mr. Sterling, Sarah began, her voice cutting through the room's tension. Before we discuss the final signatures, we need to address the updated asset disclosure. Specifically, the founder's clause in the Sterling-Vance partnership agreement. Julian let out a loud, bored groan. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Sarah, we've been over this for 6 months. Elena gets the townhouse in Brooklyn and $5 million in cash. That was the deal. The company is mine. My grandfather built it, I expanded it, and no partnership fluff is going to change that. I'm not giving her a seat on the board just because she's bored. It's not about a seat on the board, Julian, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the man I had loved, the man I had supported when he was nearly bankrupt 5 years ago, and the man who had discarded me the moment his stock price hit an all-time high. And it's not about the townhouse. Julian leaned back, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He looked at Chloe, who was busy checking her reflection in her phone screen. Then what is it about? Elena? Are you going to ask for the jewelry back? Keep it. It's out of style anyway. Actually, Sarah said, pulling a thick stack of documents from her bag. It's about the 51% controlling interest in Sterling Global. Specifically, the voting shares currently held in the succession trust established by your late grandfather, Silas Sterling. Julian laughed then. It was a genuine laugh, full of derision. That trust is ironclad, Sarah. The shares remain with the majority holder until he stopped. His eyes flickered to the baby carrier again. Until a legitimate male heir of the third generation is born, Sarah finished for him. The trust states, and I quote, upon the birth of the first legitimate male heir, 51% of all voting shares and controlling interests shall immediately vest in the mother of said heir, to be held in trust for the child until his 21st birthday. The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe stopped looking at her phone. Marcus Thorne, Julian's lawyer, froze with his pen halfway to a page. Julian's smirk didn't just fade. It vanished, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor that made him look 10 years older. You're lying, Julian whispered. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wild. You told me. You said you couldn't get pregnant. We tried for 2 years. You said it wasn't happening. I said it wasn't happening then, Julian, I said. I felt a strange, cold peace wash over me. I found out 2 weeks after. You moved Chloe into our guest house. I tried to tell you. I called you 20 times that first month. You blocked my number. You told your assistant to tell me that any further communication should go through legal. So I took your advice. I went through legal. This is a scam, Chloe shrieked, her voice high and ugly. She stood up, her chair screeching against the marble. Julian, she's lying. That's not your baby. It can't be. You said she was over. Julian didn't look at Chloe. He didn't even seem to hear her. He was staring at the baby carrier like it was a ticking bomb. The DNA results are attached to page 4 of the filing, Mr. Sterling, Sarah said calmly. Conducted at birth. It's a 99.9% match. Your grandfather was a very traditional man, Julian. He didn't trust you to keep the company in. The family, he wanted to make sure that if you ever lost your way, the Sterling legacy would be protected by the woman who carried the next generation. I looked at Julian. I watched as the realization set in. He wasn't just losing a wife today. He wasn't just losing a settlement. He was losing his kingdom, and he was losing it to a woman he had called menial and a child he hadn't even bothered to name. Sign the papers, Julian, I said softly, so you can get to the airport. I'm sure State Arts is lovely this time of year. The silence in the courtroom wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air right before a thunderstorm breaks. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic, soft clicking of my lawyer's pen. Julian looked like he had been struck. He sat perfectly still, his face pale, staring at the small, sleeping form of the son he hadn't known existed. Beside him, Chloe was vibrating with rage. This is a setup. She hissed, her voice loud enough to make the court bailiff look up. Julian, she's trying to steal your life. You told me the company was yours. You told me I'd be the first lady of Sterling Global. You can't let her do this with a prop. A prop? I asked, finally turning my head to look at her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. His name is Leo, Chloe, and he's not a prop. He's the majority shareholder of the company you've been bragging about on Instagram for 6 months. Julian finally moved. He leaned forward, his elbows hitting the table with a dull thud. He rubbed his face with his hands, his wedding ring, which he still wore for some reason, catching the light. When he looked up, the arrogance was gone. It was replaced by a frantic, desperate calculation. Elena, he said, his voice cracking. We can talk about this. We don't need the judge for this. We can go to my office. We can settle this privately. A new trust. A different arrangement. There is no privately anymore, Julian, I said. I felt a strange, cold satisfaction. You made sure of that when you filed for a public divorce to show the world you were moving on. You wanted the headlines. Now you have them. Sarah, my lawyer, stood up. She smoothed her blazer and looked directly at Julian's attorney, Marcus. Marcus was currently staring at the trust documents as if they were written in an alien language. He knew he was beaten. A succession trust from a man like Silas Sterling was a fortress. It couldn't be breached. Mr. Thorne, Sarah said, her voice echoing in the chamber, the vesting is automatic. As of 8:02 a.m. this morning, the moment the birth certificate and DNA results were verified by the trust's executors, the voting rights for 51% of Sterling Global were transferred to my client, Elena Vance, as the custodial trustee for Leo Sterling. Julian, you are no longer the CEO. You are a minority shareholder. You serve at the pleasure of the majority. I am the CEO. Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This time, the bailiff stepped forward, a hand on his holster. Julian didn't care. He was losing the only thing he actually loved, his power. I built the tech. I secured the London contracts. You can't give my chair to a woman who spends her days picking out nursery curtains. I spent my days building your brand, Julian, I reminded him. My voice was like ice. I was the one who smoothed over the board members when you had your tantrums. I was the one who rewrote your speeches. And while you were out celebrating with Chloe, I was the one making sure your grandfather's legacy didn't crumble. I think I know exactly how to handle your chair. Chloe stood up then, her expensive handbag clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. Julian, do something. We have the gala tonight. We're supposed to be the guests of honor. If she owns the company, then what am I? Julian didn't answer her. He didn't even look at her. The woman he had traded his marriage for was suddenly an expensive distraction he couldn't afford. Marcus, Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. Tell me there's a loophole. Tell me we can contest the legitimate part of the heir clause. Marcus Thorne sighed, a long, weary sound. He pushed the papers back towards Sarah. Julian, the child was conceived during the marriage. He was born within the legal window. The DNA is a match in the eyes of the Silas Sterling Trust. He is the king, and Elena is the regent. The judge entered the room then. We all stood, but the energy had shifted. Completely, Julian looked like a man walking to the gallows. Chloe looked like she was about to be sick. The judge looked over the updated filings. He was an older man with sharp eyes that had seen every kind of greed New York had to offer. He looked at me, then at the baby, and then at Julian. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice booming, it appears your generous settlement offer is now irrelevant. Since your ex-wife now controls the majority of your assets, the division of property will be reassessed, starting with the Sterling estate in East Hampton. That house has been in my family for generations. Julian protested. And now it belongs to the majority holder of Sterling Global, the judge replied dryly. Miss Vance, how would you like to proceed? I stood up. I felt Leo stir against my chest. He let out a tiny, soft sigh, his small hand curling against my blouse. He was so small, yet he had more power in this room than the man who had abandoned us. I'd like to adjourn for today, I said, looking directly at Julian. I have a board meeting to prepare for, and Julian, I'll need your keycard to the executive suite by 5 p.m. Chloe's name has already been removed from the guest list for the gala. Julian sat down, defeated. Chloe let out a strangled sob and turned to run out of the courtroom, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. She didn't even wait for him. The billionaire wasn't a billionaire anymore, and the lover didn't have a reason to stay. I walked past Julian on my way out. He reached out, his fingers brushing the sleeve of my coat. Elena, he whispered, please, think about what we had. I stopped and looked down at his hand. We had a partnership, Julian. You're the one who decided to liquidate it. Now, you're just a minority interest. I walked out the doors. The hallway was full of reporters. The Sterling divorce was big news. I didn't hide. I didn't run. I adjusted Leo's blanket, smiled for the cameras, and walked toward the elevator. The executive floor of Sterling Global always smelled like expensive ozone and filtered air. When I was Julian's wife, I used to bring him lunch here. I would wait in the reception area, sitting on the designer leather sofa, while his assistant gave me pitying smiles. I was the trophy that was starting to tarnish. Today, the elevator doors opened and the entire floor went silent. The receptionist, the same one who used to make me wait 30 minutes, stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her monitor. Miss Vance, she stammered, her eyes darting to the baby carrier. We didn't expect you until the board meeting at 2. I like to be early, I said, my heels clicking rhythmically on the polished marble. Is Julian in my office? Your office? The CEO suite, I clarified. I didn't wait for her to answer. I walked past the glass-walled offices of the VPs who used to ignore my emails. Now they were standing behind their desks, watching me pass like I was a tidal wave. I pushed open the double doors of the main suite. Julian was there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. He was still wearing the same suit from court, but he looked crumpled. On the desks at his executive keycard and his company phone. Beside them was a small box. Chloe's things. She's gone, isn't she? I asked, setting the carrier down on the sofa. Julian turned. The light from the New York skyline caught the deep shadows under his eyes. She left as soon as she realized the trust included the Hamptons house and the jet. She didn't even pack her shoes, Elena. She just called an Uber. I sat in the high-backed leather chair. My chair, she was an investment. Julian, and the market crashed. You, of all people, should understand that. Julian walked toward the desk, his hands trembling. I can't believe my grandfather did this. He never said a word. He let me believe I was the one in control. He knew you, Julian, I said, leaning back. He knew that power without a heart is just a hollow shell. He waited for a legitimate heir because he wanted the company to belong to someone who understood sacrifice. You thought being a Sterling was about the money. Silas knew it was about the blood. Julian looked at the baby, who was just starting to wake up. Leo let out a small, soft cry. For the first time, Julian reached out. His fingers hovered over the baby's tiny hand. Can I? He whispered. No, I said. The word was sharp. It cut through the room like a blade. Julian flinched. You don't get to play father when it's convenient for your image, Julian. You didn't want the baby when he was just a heartbeat. You don't get to want him now that he's a majority shareholder. You'll have your visitation rights. As dictated. By the court, but in this office? You are a minority partner. Nothing more. The board meeting at 2 p.m. was a bloodbath, but a quiet one. I didn't fire Julian. That would have been too messy for the stock price. Instead, I stripped him of his voting power and moved him to a ceremonial role in international relations. He would be traveling a lot. He would be far away from the halls of power he had used to humiliate me. That evening, I didn't go to the gala. I didn't need the flashbulbs or the fake smiles of the Manhattan elite. I went back to the townhouse in Brooklyn, the one Julian thought was a generous consolation prize. I sat in the nursery, the room bathed in the soft, warm glow of a dim lamp. The air smelled of baby powder and laundry detergent. The doorbell rang at 8. It was a courier. He handed me a final envelope from Marcus Thorne, Julian's lawyer. It was the signed surrender of the East Hampton estate and the keys to the private vault. I didn't feel a rush of greed. I didn't feel like a billionaire. I looked down at Leo, who was finally asleep in my arms. I realized that the 51% didn't matter. The money didn't matter. What mattered was the silence, the absolute beautiful silence of a life where I no longer had to beg for a seat at the table. I didn't just have the table, I had the whole room. I kissed Leo's forehead and turned off the lamp. Julian was probably sitting in a hotel room, realizing that he had traded everything for a woman who didn't even know his middle name. He was the billionaire who had lost his empire, and I was the mother who had just begun hers.
Every story we share here is a piece of a lived truth, finally whispered out loud. If today's journey resonated with you, please subscribe to Quiet Drama Stories and leave a like. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your support ensures that these quiet voices are finally heard. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are never as alone as you feel. See you in the next story.